Radical ideologies,
Yeah.
I believe, were completely inevitable in that period.
Yeah. The phenomena of Hitler was so extraordinary, not because he was extraordinary, but because he was ordinary.
These people did what they did because they thought it was heroic.
Yeah.
Even though what they did was gravely wrong.
Yeah.
When a nation gets to desperation,
Yeah.
and constant cycle, it's so hard not to think that way.
It's so hard to say we'll just wait it out for the moderate candidates to like slowly lift up the quality or the economics of the country when you're in such a bad position like in Argentina. Yeah. All right. Well, what are we talking about this episode, Ben?
In this episode, well, we were discussing a lot. We're both great fans of history and the study of history, and we like history, like reading about it.
Yeah.
And so we were thinking, how should we view history? How should we study history? Is there any sort of lens that we should take? Are there any lenses to which we view history which are harmful to what we take from history, to the objective of history? What do you think is the objective of reading history, of learning about history?
The objective of learning about history.
Because we all know the classic objective of history that, 7th grade class.
Yeah.
When you have that first history class.
Yeah.
And they're like, history is really important because as a society, it helps us not to repeat our past mistakes, or it also keeps us from ignorance of the past. All these sorts of things. But what do you think is the true?
I think it's I'm about to go on a very long tangent, so you'll have to bear with me.
Sorry.
I think it's very dependent on the type of history that you're looking at, right? But the core principle, in my opinion, is that history is about learning why things are the way they are, right? So let's take the Russia's Vladimir Putin's and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, right? If you don't know your history about the USSR or the Russian Empire and all that, you would not really understand why Vladimir Putin would invade Ukraine, or on what basis he wants to invade Ukraine, right? That's about modern history. So when you look at modern history, you're really looking at like, what are the events that led up to the effects that we're seeing
now?
Yeah, why is the state of affairs the way it is now today?
Okay.
But the further back you go, it's still about cause and effect, but it's less about the specific events that led to the state of affairs and more about the specific cultural movements that led to the way that we think today. So when you go back to looking at like ancient history, I think a lot of the really interesting analysis comes about when you look at, well, why are the cultural factors that influence our thinking and our actions and the world as a whole today, where did those come from, and how did we get there? And then you go back super far to ancient history, right? To look at, well, the formation, for example, of Christianity and how that influences modern Western thought, or the formation of Islam and how that influences Middle Eastern thought, and the formation of Confucianism in China, how that influences Eastern thought and how that influences Eastern world events and things like that. I think history as a whole is, yes, about learning from the past and not wanting to repeat, but it is, for me, primarily about learning why things are the way they are. What do you think about that?
I would pretty much agree with you. I'd say the learning from the past thing, though simple, I think that is ultimately what history is. I think history is a moral science. And we were talking about this before. Should we moralize history? And that's a really hard one.
Yeah.
And personally, I think that the moral teaching is essential to studying history. Like, I think if you don't take a moral lesson from history as a society, like if you don't look back at all the bad stuff that we did before and then say that was bad, we should probably not do that in the future, I think history is useless.
Yeah.
It's not a science. It's not about just, but it's very important. But it's not about just reporting everything, like being able to look back and have dot to dot exactly this is how it happened.
Yeah.
And part of that as well is that as historians, I feel like we're all postmodernists. As much as I don't like postmodernism,
Yeah, yeah.
I think if you study history, you're a postmodernist because there is no one book,
Mm-hmm.
one true history
Yeah,
about anything. You can't um, look back look back at World War Two and have one book that tells you the true World War Two history.
yeah,
Different countries have their own biases.
yeah,
The
yeah,
Russians will say a completely different story of World War Two than Americans than the British.
yeah.
Um,
And I think it's really important to note on that point specifically, right? When you say the Russians have a different story of World War II than the Americans and the British, it's not because the Russians have a different objective reality or they believe in a different objective reality.
yeah.
They still believe in the same course of events, but the way that they view those events, right, is very different,
Mm.
right? And I think to your point, right, there's a reason why we write history not in a timeline, right? We learn about history
Mm.
in a book that has, yes, the events, but also an analysis of those events
And
from
opinions. Yeah.
opinions about those events from a causal point of view, from a moral point of view, like these different points of views that we use to draw out ideas from these events, right? No one, there's no, I mean, you wouldn't read a history book that's just a long timeline of a certain period that has no other substance to it. It's just dates and names, and there's nothing else to it, right? I think it's absolutely true that history is part of the humanities for a reason,
Hmm.
right? It's because you can draw out moral human ideas and concepts out of
Exactly.
the events of
Yeah.
history.
That's why it's a humanities, not just a science. But I would say there is a point and where moralizing history seeps into becomes biases if it's not ordered correctly.
Hmm.
If the moralizing comes first, and if we take too much of a heavy stance on certain things, where as a culture we're like, these are the baddies, these are the goodies. I really don't think that helps with history because it
Yeah,
can create a sort of presentism, um, just a general bias, but also presentism, where we look back and say, we use our prejudices from now
yeah,
and say these people are obviously wrong. Like, how could you not know that doing this was wrong, that human sacrifice was wrong, that
yeah,
all these sorts of things? And then we don't realize that very possibly in 100 years, people are going to look back into history,
yeah,
which is us now, and say, how could they not know that eating meat was bad or
yeah,
whatever, like this sort of thing?
yeah,
And because of that, I think it hinders our ability to learn. So I think that being said, I think there is a point where moralizing history takes too much of a focal point, or it's not ordered correctly.
hmm,
If it comes before finding the facts, I think that the people who we call horrible figures of
yeah, yeah,
history, you know, Hitler, Stalin, whatever, they're born out of conditions and they're created by conditions, by circumstances. Obviously, they have culpability. I'm not saying, oh, whatever, they don't have culpability. Obviously, they do,
yeah,
but they're created by conditions. They're not inherent. Um, I don't think they're inherent evil
yeah.
villains.
Like you're
Well,
saying, like Hitler was not an exceptionally evil person from his conception,
yeah,
right?
like no one. I feel like no one. This is so fascinating. To think about in history.
Hmm.
I don't think anyone really chooses to be a villain. It's not like Hollywood.
Yeah,
No one enjoys being the villain. It's quite the opposite. Like, these people did what they did because they thought it was heroic,
yeah,
even though what they did was gravely wrong.
yeah,
They were trying to be heroes.
yeah. I think the fact is like a lot of the great villains of the 20th, or at least the way that we see them, the villains of the 20th century, the dictators that caused mass suffering and genocide and stuff like that. They didn't get the job because they didn't go into the job of becoming the dictator of their nation because they wanted to cause as much suffering as possible, right? They went into the job thinking that they were going to create some like utopic perfect society.
Exactly.
Um, Obviously that was not the case. Like that not eventuate, but they saw the terrible things that they were doing as unfortunate stepping
Mm.
stones.
Certainty is the enemy,
Yeah,
I would say, and utopianism.
yeah, right. And so Hitler's, or I think Stalin is actually the best example of this. Stalin's quest for a perfect Stalinist communist society, right, was built on terrible, terrible purges, terrible, terrible collectivization, which simply just did not work. But he wanted, like, he truly believed that this was the way. This was the only
Yeah.
way forward,
And I feel
right?
like, especially with Stalin, Stalin's interesting because with the purges,
Yeah,
that's a different story. He directly caused harm to others,
yeah,
even though he thought it was overall good.
yeah. He thought
But
for the
with
greater
the
good.
collectivization, it's not like he knew. I mean, actually, he knew people would die, but
But
it's much less of a culpability.
well, yeah,
Really, he genuinely thought it was the best economic system.
he genuinely thought that, like, once they got through the period of collectivization and industrialization, Russia would be for the better.
Yeah,
Now, arguably, you know, they kind of were. If you look at it from without that, they wouldn't have won World War Two. But
yeah,
that's a completely different story because
yeah.
you know,
And also, you know, in the same way that Stalin knew people were going to die, but he thought it would lapse and then
it'd be worth it.
it would be worth it. In the same way, capitalism, when capitalism started,
Yeah,
it was insane how many people were lifted out of poverty, but also how many people were forced into terrible working conditions,
yeah,
children in terrible working conditions,
yeah,
so much other stuff,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
corruption, which comes from it. So nothing's perfect, and it's easy to look at it from our bias and say that's evil.
I think it's easy to label. I think it's very easy to label, Stalin or Mao
Mm,
as like, oh, they were just evil people who were doing evil things. Well, no, because I think it really loses the sense in which no, they're just people that are
exactly.
shaped by their beliefs and and where their context, and then based off those things, like any other person, they act upon those upon the context, upon the beliefs. Now, this action is, in their case, completely wrong, and it's the wrong action to take. But I think labeling them as, oh, they're bad people and there's good people, and we shouldn't like there's nothing to look further than that. There's no nuance, and Hitler was just
Mm,
an evil person. He was just evil. It not only is not helpful, but it also removes the ability to understand that Hitler, the phenomena of Hitler, was so extraordinary, not because he was extraordinary, but because he was ordinary. Right?
and I think that if you resort to those labels, which sometimes subconsciously we just do,
Yeah.
we lose the sense of the tragic.
Yeah.
If we moralize history too much, we lose the sense of the tragic, and so what ends up happening is that we think of ourselves as almost past that. That's not
Yeah.
history. That's
Yeah.
just history.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's just history. But ultimately, everyone in history always thought they were better, and they still did
Yeah.
a lot of stuff that was bad.
Yeah.
Um, you know, you got to understand that like Hitler was able to convince millions
Yeah.
to follow his vision.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think it is a little arrogant if you do this labeling thing of Hitler bad. Yeah, if you do labeling like Hitler bad and people who followed him were evil, it's a little arrogant to because that assumes that that would never happen to me. I could never be influenced by ideology. I could never be influenced by
yeah,
propaganda or what have you. And then you separate yourself from them. You
mm,
say, oh,
exactly.
they're not the same. We're not
It's
the
the
same
human
type of
race.
person.
It's
Yeah,
we're flawed as a human race. Obviously, that doesn't give us the excuse to go and genocide millions.
yeah,
But in the same way that he was able to convince millions, that could be us one day.
yeah,
We can't separate ourselves from that.
yeah.
Um,
So I think it's you can condemn the specific actions that take place. It's obvious. You can
yeah,
say the Holocaust was a bad thing that Hitler did, but I think to label him as an inherent like as anyone as an inherently good or evil like character is just a bit short-sighted, and it loses a lot of the nuance that is involved in making a judgment about a person.
yeah. You
Right?
lose the analysis of the conditions which led
Yeah.
up to it. Like instead of asking how the hell was this guy able to convince so many people
Yeah.
of this ideology, which now we look back and we're like, that's absurd. How could you think
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah.
You think it's so absurd and so evil that you kind of forget about the fact that a lot of people believe this,
Yeah.
and you forget about analyzing how it was able to
Yeah.
spread like
You
that.
you
That's
forget
more
about
important.
the broader context which led to the idea becoming so prominent, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Um I think that brings up a very good, interesting dichotomy that I really like thinking about when it
yeah,
comes to studying history is I generally believe that we spend too much time when we're looking at history talking about specific people, right? Whereas I think it is more useful to talk about uh, institutions, structures, and broader cultural movements, right? Because let's face it, if Hitler was just the only guy in Germany that believed what he believed, or there was not the political structure of Germany was not the way it was, there's no way he would have risen to prominence. And I think attributing the rise of
yeah.
Nazism just to
Okay.
the work of one guy, I think
Even
lacks a lot of nuance.
Hitler's the perfect example because he he was he was chosen to be like the marketing guy for the party, kind of. You know, he it wasn't like he started the whole thing.
Yeah, he didn't
He was
start the
just
Nazi
he
Party.
was like
He was
talent.
he was a
He was
talented
headhunted.
spokesman. Like he was a talented
Yeah,
spokesman.
he was headhunted by the
Yeah,
ideologists.
because I think
Forgot the details
was it
exactly.
him? Because I'm pretty sure he used to work for the government or something, and he went to one of the meetings, right, just to see like basically spy on the see what's going on, and he basically fell in love with the whole ideology of the Nazi Party, which
Yeah.
was not. I don't know if it was officially called the Nazi Party by that point, but
No, I don't think it
it would
was.
become the Nazi Party, and
Yeah.
then he would eventually join, and he would rise up the ranks because of his ability to as an orator,
Mm.
right? But the ideology is not. He didn't write it. Like he did
No.
not
He
put
had puppets behind him until later on. And
exactly,
until
exactly.
I think in the 30s, then he actually got power.
Yeah, but the actual ideology of fascism and Nazism or anti-Semitism, it was all there before him. He didn't create it. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is understanding that individual people in history typically don't have they typically have less power than we think.
Hmm.
We tend to think that there are great people out there, like people of the past who were considered great. Alexander the Great, as in great in stature, not great in morality, but they by themselves were able to move mountains and move ideologies and do all this. But the truth is that usually the invention and spread of ideas is has way more to do with like a collective society, you know, nurturing that idea
Systems.
and a
Systems,
system. Yeah,
institutions, more than
a single person,
yeah.
right? And so like I think a really good example of this I like is the Industrial Revolution because there are plenty of people who are very influential in the Industrial Revolution. The invention of the Jenny mill, the Jenny not the Jenny the Jenny spinning thing,
Yeah,
the
spinning Jenny.
spinning Jenny.
Yeah.
Yes, that was arguably very important. There's Lord Turnip who created the four corners of the rotation, the crop rotation cycle, which allowed for the less work intensive agriculture, which allowed for more people to move to cities and create industrialization. And there's all these important people that you can point to and say, "Oh, this guy. That's why the Industrial Revolution happened." Or like, this guy. But the thing is, right, is this Industrial Revolution. It wasn't a prescribed movement. It was a movement that occurred because of the incentive structures that were put into place.
It was inevitable.
It was inevitable,
Inevitable.
yeah, because of the structure. The structure was you have a set amount of labor, like within your family, right? You have your family, and you have a certain amount of labor, and you want to maximize that so that you can make more money,
Yep.
right? Um, so that you can provide for your family and
Mm.
give them more goods. That's the basic structure
Yeah.
that existed, right before the Industrial Revolution, and that creates a bunch of incentive structures, which means that when agriculture gets more efficient, you want to offload some of that labor from agriculture into more wealth creating enterprises such as the cities. And so people move to the cities. It's not because one guy dictated that this was
It
going
never
to.
is.
It never is.
And in the same way, radical ideologies,
Yeah.
I believe, were completely inevitable in that period of
Yeah.
pre-World War II.
Yeah, because of the economic conditions and the overall political environment.
Exactly. And so if we understand those conditions, exactly how the events that led up to these ideologies gaining traction, I think that's
Yeah.
much more helpful because, um, sure, we can say Nazism is evil, and sure, for the rest of history, most of us are probably going to know Nazism is evil, right? But let's be real. There's going to be another ideology that's going to pop up. It's going to
Yeah.
be kind of like Nazism,
Yeah.
just different name, slightly different beliefs. And what? We're just not going to see it coming if
Yeah.
we don't really analyze history in this way, where we understand conditions, circumstances, events
Yeah.
properly.
Because if you only look at the figures and you focus on what this special figure in history that we put special emphasis on, and we look at them and we say, let's analyze the things that led to his rise, and let's say if he's good or bad or whatever, and you ignore all the underlying institutional factors or the underlying institutional or contextual factors that supported his whole rise and the rise of the ideology as a whole, then yeah, you're going to be blindsided when those same institutions and factors lead to the rise of a different radical leader who might not be the same as, you know, your Adolf Hitler type, but then the institutions and the context is the same, which gives rise to the radicalism, right?
Yeah, that's why it's such a fascinating era, that pre-World War II
Yeah,
era, because if you were an ordinary person in Germany, in in Russia, whatever,
yeah,
you can't really choose. You're either a communist, radical, or you're a Nazi.
yeah,
Pretty much. Even in Britain, there was some sort of polarization starting to brew.
yeah, yeah,
And so you're kind of left, like, the ordinary person has to support some kind of evil.
yeah.
It's really interesting.
But I think
That proves, though, that
Yeah.
it was the conditions.
yeah, because the conditions of like pre-war Europe, right, which led to the rise of these radical polar opposites, is because the economic system or the economic conditions of the time basically made people disillusioned with
Yes.
being moderate, right? Germany was in so much debt. Then the currency was so devalued that people, they needed, what they wanted was radical change from either a communist or a fascist. They didn't care. They just wanted radical change because what they saw was conditions are so bad. Electing a moderate, all that will do is, if anything, a slight increase in the quality of life, right? Whereas because
Exactly.
a moderate won't introduce radical change, which will create radical change in quality of life. A radical will introduce the radical changes that will create the radical spike, or proposed
Yeah.
radical spike, right? And so let's not focusing on, well, Hitler had this, he had ingrained in himself this sort of blah blah blah.
In
Look
the
at
end,
it.
he got voted in.
Yeah, he got voted in
There was
because I mean there was some political violence,
But he got voted in.
but he
essentially.
did get
He
a
gained
large proportion of
the nation.
populace.
The nation was on his side.
Well, yeah,
People was on his
a
side.
not insignificant amount of the nation was on his side because of the economic conditions and the structure, which supported and incentivized people to vote for a radical a radical candidate over someone more moderate.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's the thing is, when you study these things, then you can have sympathy for these people, and you can see, like, I understand that very well. This idea of needing radicals to lead the country. As I have Argentinian background, and I talk to my relatives in Argentina, and the country was in such it was an economic shithole, and not just economic crime, just the economic system wasn't working, and it was destroying the country in so many ways, not just economically but socially.
Yeah.
That they just wanted to change, and people who were not right wing at all,
Yeah.
started to vote for Millet,
Yeah.
who was I mean, you can see him. He's a radical.
Yeah, yeah,
Luckily, I don't think he's planning a genocide anytime soon.
yeah,
But but he's radical,
yeah,
and being a politician is hard because every politician has to say, to bring good,
yeah,
we have to take away something.
yeah,
We have to cause harm to someone.
yeah, yeah,
To the extent they do that is different for each one.
yeah,
A moderate might just raise taxes or
yeah. Like
cut benefits slightly.
moderate politician will be in support of slow, gradual change, right? Because slow, gradual change, yes, it creates slow, gradual growth, but it also means that you don't get huge spikes in like quality of life, or huge reductions in like quality of life, or reductions in, like, taxes or whatever. Like, you don't get huge changes. That's the point of a moderate. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then a radical, of course, will say, look, we're going to do some big sacrifices.
Yeah.
Right.
And I completely understand that.
Yeah.
When a nation gets to desperation,
Yeah.
and constant cycle, it's so hard not to think that way.
It's so hard to say we'll just wait it out for the moderate candidates to, like, slowly lift up the quality or the economics of the country, when you're in such a bad position, like in Argentina. Like, Argentina's been in such a bad economic position for so long. People, as you said, they don't care anymore. They just want something to change.
Yes, like people, I know left-wing people
Yeah.
who voted for Malay because um, they knew and they thought that he's the only way that some kind of change is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we'll take the bad stuff, but I need that change. I need to see something change in front of my eyes because I can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing. And I feel like that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, history repeats itself.
Yeah, and
in the end,
I think that
this is what it's about.
When we surmise all of this back to the original topic, right? Should we view history in a moral lens, or how should we analyze history, right? The big lesson that I take from pre-war Europe is not that charismatic leaders can galvanize a ideology, right? I don't really care that much. I mean, I do care a little bit, but the main takeaway is not that Hitler was an evil person, or the main takeaway is not that Hitler was a charismatic leader. I mean, those are all they're worthy takeaways. But I think the biggest takeaway that we still see today is that when economic conditions are bad, right? When the culture and the economics point towards a certain way, the people will follow that, and the people will follow radicalism when the economy is bad, right? That's the big takeaway from pre-war Europe, right?
I would 100% agree. I would say that the purpose of history is moral.
Yeah.
But that's the end. We should not go into history with moral eyes, with a moral lens.
Yeah.
The purpose of history is to, as a society, improve our moral state, I guess, but not through
putting labeling
ourselves as above, or saying like, oh, we're so much better than them. Look at how terrible they were.
Yeah.
No, because people are going to say that about us later.
Yeah.
No. We should analyze the conditions, understand events with as little bias as possible first.
Yeah.
In order to truly learn from history.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's 100% true, right? Because labeling from above doesn't really do anything. It's understanding why that really gives you the key lesson that you can take away from history, and hopefully not repeat the same mistakes again, right? And so you can learn from history without having to look at everything through a moral dichotomy of good and bad, right? First, understand, then you can make a judgment. Don't make a judgment to understand. I think is the main takeaway.
Exactly. I wouldn't go as far as to say moral judgments are useless. Of course not.
Yeah.
But I would put it like you. It has to be ordered.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really good quote to finish it off from Gordon Wright. He says that, for some of us at least, our search for truth ought to be quite consciously suffused by a commitment to some deeply held humane values.
Mm-hmm.
The effort to keep these two goals in balance may be precarious, but if we can manage it, perhaps we will be on the way to re-establishing the role of history as one, and not the least, of what we might fairly call the moral arts. I think that really sums up our argument here.
Yeah.
That's from Gordon Wright, by the way.
Yeah. Nah, very good quote, and I think that's a very good way to end this episode.
Yes.
So
And
yeah,
once again, as we always say every episode, if you have any thoughts, any disagreements,
yeah,
anything, leave it in the comments and we will definitely get back to you.
yeah, for sure.
We really enjoy doing this. We're not experts at all.
Yeah,
We're not experts, but we like to think and we like to let our ideas battle it out.
yeah. I think a lot of this is um we think about these things and we talk about this on this podcast unfiltered. So maybe it's not, exactly what we want, but the more important is we get these ideas out there and contest them and see where they fail. But yeah,
Exactly. See you in the next one.
see ya. I don't really care that much. I mean, I do care a little bit, but